today we're going to present to you about assessing vocabulary. Our table of content is the nature of vocabulary, teaching vocabulary, and vocabulary assessment. You can go to the next slide, please. So here are our group members. There is me, Lusiana Dewi, Mellyana Candra, Adinda, Putri, Khairun, Nafsul, and the last one is Nursukma. The nature of vocabulary. So before we talk about the definition, let's talk about the background. Words and grammar are often thought of as the building blocks of language proficiency. A learner with a large vocabulary is well equipped to develop skills in reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So, what is vocabulary itself? Vocabulary refers to words we use to communicate in oral and phonetic language. Also, vocabulary as the entire stock of words belonging to a branch of knowledge or known by an individual. After we learn about vocabulary itself, let's learn about the types of vocabulary. The first one is the core vocabulary, consisting of several categories: modal items, the lexical parts, stance word, discourse markers, general, deictic, noun, adjective, adverb, verbs. These vocabularies are the most normal vocabularies that you will find everywhere around you. The second one is the academic vocabulary, set of words common to academic disciplines. As we know, and as we have made in the previous semester before, we write a report consists of the words like analyze, approach, assess, method, or data. The last one is technical vocabulary, the words that are most frequent in a particular subject area, such as computer science, law, or medicine. Example, microbe, gene, organism, or cell. We can move to the next material with the next speaker, please.
Okay, thank you. The next is teaching vocabulary. Next slide, please. Principle of vocabulary instrument. So make sure before we teaching, make sure we plan the vocabulary teaching and the second integrating vocabulary teaching into the lesson. So there are direct and indirect teaching. Direct teaching is activities that seek to teach students particular words or word group and or help them remember words they have already encountered. And then indirect learning that takes place without specific vocabulary instruction. It's learning that is byproduct of engaging in other activities, such as reading or listening, and depends upon the frequency with which learners encounter words. So learning vocabulary can be done inside or outside classroom. When we learn inside the classroom, we can focus on vocabulary, offer variety, repeat and recycle, provide opportunities to organize vocabulary to students, make vocabulary learning personal, and use vocabulary strategy. And the last one, do not overdo it. And then outside the classroom, we can ask the students to prepare vocabulary notebooks and then research tools so we can like thinking what should we prepare for the learning and research which tool can be used for learning vocabulary. And then everyday usage. So when we have learning vocabulary, then we have to use it in our daily life.
The vocabulary assessment. Okay, here's first thing we have general overview. So vocabulary assessment is a way to find out how well someone knows and understands words in certain language, and it is important part of tests of language skills. And here's the purpose. So vocabulary assessments are used to gauge a person's level of proficiency in a specific language. By means of vocabulary assessment, so teachers can figure out of the amount of vocabulary acquisition that has occurred within the classroom settings, and They try to evaluate the efficiency of the instructions. Parameters of vocabulary assessing. So a person's vocabulary is tested to see how well they will know and understand words in certain language. The accuracy, reliability, and fairness of a vocabulary evaluation or assessment depend on a number of factors being taken into account. And here's the parameters of vocabulary assessing. First one is informal versus formal one. So informal evaluation here often used for diagnostic or formative purposes, and they provide insight to a person's vocabulary knowledge in a more relaxed, like low-stakes setting, while the formal one typically used for summative purposes such as grading or certification. Second one is discrete versus embedded. So one isolate vocabulary items, often one word at a time. So this method evaluates isolate vocabulary items, frequently one word at a time, while embedded is assess vocabulary knowledge within context of sentences, paragraph, or passages. Third one, context dependent and independent evaluation or assessment. So context independent evaluation assess a person's knowledge of vocabulary words in isolation without considering specific context or situation, while dependent evaluation assess a person's ability to understand and use vocabulary within specific context or situation. And the last one is receptive vocabulary versus productive vocabulary. Receptive evaluation or assessment here assess a person's ability to recognize and understand words when presented in written or spoken form, while productive here assess a person's ability to actively use vocabulary in speech or writing. It is demonstrating their proficiency in generating language.
Okay, now we enter to the type of vocabulary assessment. So the type of vocabulary assessment consists of two: discrete vocabulary and embedded vocabulary. So what is discrete vocabulary? So discrete vocabulary assessment refers to a method of evaluating someone's vocabulary knowledge by assessing individual words in isolation. And what is embedded vocabulary? So embedded vocabulary refers to the use of vocabulary within a context or a large pitch of text. It involves understanding and using words within the framework of sentences, paragraph, or even longer passages. Embedded vocabulary assessment focuses on how well someone can comprehend, apply, and express themselves using a variety of words in context. So this is the example of discrete vocabulary. The first one is multiple choice matching format, question format, sentence completion or gap fill item, and translation. And embedded vocabulary, there are assessing vocabulary in reading comprehension, assessing vocabulary in writing, and assessing vocabulary in speaking. Okay, now let's see the example of the several type of vocabulary assessment. Okay, so this is the example of multiple choice question format. Okay. Okay, this is the example of matching format. Okay, next. And this is the example of gap fill item. And next. And the last is no example of translation. Okay, and last assessing vocabulary in reading comprehension. Okay, me the next.
We move to the vocabulary test validity and reliability. Validity, in simple, we can define the quality or state of being valid, and reliability is the quality of being trustworthy. In the validity, there are criterion validity and content validity. And the next, some specification of content validity. There are what is the basis to this generalization and is it supportable? And the last, what word knowledge aspects are being addressed. And in their reliability, there are test retest method and internal consistency method. Okay, scoring rubric. There are two. The first one, analytical rubric, and the last one, holistic rubric. Analytical rubric as resembles a grade with the criteria for a student product list in the leftmost column and with levels of performance list across to the top row often using numbers and descriptive text. And holistic rubrics are three parts. The first, entering, second, emerging, third, developing, fourth, expanding, fifth, reaching, and the last, reaching. Maybe I will explain the first part. The first part is entering. You say of highest frequency vocabulary from school setting and content areas. The next part, emerging, you say of general language related to the content area, lack of vocabulary may be evident. Okay, the last part, the sixth, this preaching, consistent use of just the right word in just the right place, precise vocabulary usage in general, specific or technical language. Okay. First, vocabulary is the basic aspect of learning a language. And the last conclusion, in assessing vocabulary, we have to consider several points such as the reasons and the dimension. Therefore, we can use appropriate types of vocabulary assessment to ensure the student vocabulary mastery. Maybe that's all from us, from group assessing vocabulary. Thank you very much, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.